and welcome. To begin with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we're all zooming in from. I'm currently on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung land in Melbourne, and I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung as the traditional custodians of these lands and extend that acknowledgement to the First Nations people of all the different lands that we're zooming in from. Today, we're going to be talking about developing a programming vision, and I'm really thankful to our speaker, Merryn for joining us today to share her expertise. I'll ask Merryn to introduce herself in a bit more detail in a moment, and thank you also to our Auslan interpreters, Susan and Sarah, who will both be spotlighted on Zoom throughout the session, and we'll swap over every 15 minutes or so. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Anna Kennedy, the Connecting Places Manager at Regional Arts Victoria. Connecting Places is a touring and capacity building program that aims to support volunteer groups and community-run venues to present live performances for local communities throughout regional Victoria. Before we get stuck in, I'll just run through some quick housekeeping. A reminder that this session is being recorded. At the top right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see the view icon. You can click on that if you'd like to change to speaker view, where Merryn, myself, and the Auslan interpreters will be highlighted. Unlike other sessions, we'll be doing some live case studies throughout this webinar, and I've asked some of you to volunteer to respond to some pre-prepared questions. So we'll also highlight you on Zoom when that happens. I'd also like to request that everyone please mute themselves unless speaking. And if you have questions, comments, or need some tech support throughout the presentation, please use the chat function in the bottom center of the screen. You can use both the chat and raise hand functions to ask questions, and I'll call on you. And I always like to see who's joining us today. So if you could please take a moment to enter your name, the organisation or community group you're from, and the town that you're zooming in from in the chat section, that would be lovely. And now I would like to hand over to Merryn to introduce herself and some of the key concepts we'll be discussing in this webinar. Thanks, Merryn.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Anna. I'm also speaking to you from Wurundjeri land, out east from Melbourne CBD, and want to acknowledge them as the custodians and the owners of this country, this beautiful country that we share. So my background, I actually trained as a performer many years ago as a musician, and then got working in local government managing arts programs and art centres, and decided to go and do a business degree, just a management degree, to try and give myself some expertise in that area. So then I've worked for major performing arts companies, and I've worked for local governments. I've worked for the Australia Council. I've worked for what was then called ABAF, which is now Creative Partnerships Australia. And I've been an independent consultant now for more than 10 years, working a lot with regional art centres and presenters around Australia. I've done a lot of work in regional and remote Western Australia, as well as work with country arts in South Australia, and work in Victoria with quite a lot of individual programs and presenters, sometimes through RAV, sometimes just directly with the presenters themselves. So I've, in my professional career as a senior manager, before I became a consultant, I specialised in marketing. And I had actually been involved in audience research quite a lot. I did a little bit of programming. When I was with the Sydney Symphony, we did an alternative kind of more popular series. And that was the first time I ever really got involved in the whole idea of how critical programming was to audience building. And so I guess my interest in how programming and marketing work together to build audiences stems from way back then, which was, yeah, when I was much younger. So I've developed over the years of working with lots of different people in lots of different circumstances, what I would call a set of three kind of key concepts that are important for successful programming and audience development. The first one is really that you need to program. Some of these might sound like absolute common sense to you, and if they do, That's really good, by the way. I don't think it's rocket science. You need to program to attract the audiences that you want to develop and to keep. So, your potential audiences will be largely driven by the content. What might they like? If you've never programmed anything that these particular target audiences are interested in, then they're probably not going to come. Fairly obvious. And your frequent attenders will get bored with the same things over and over. One of the things that I've learned, or many people have learned through lots of audience research, is that more frequent attenders tend to develop more adventurous attitudes to what they attend over time. They seem to become more likely, particularly the more they've had an experience where they weren't sure before they went, I'm not sure I'm going to like this. If they've been to something like that repeatedly and they've walked out going, wow, that was amazing, the more likely they are to be adventurous again in the future. So you need to think about your frequent attenders and how you keep them interested, as well as, attracting potential audiences. Over time, what you program largely determines who your audiences will be. And I've got some great examples of that from research I've done, and also determines what they will think of you. So in other words, your programming will be a very major part in developing what in marketing terms we call your brand. Brand and programming are really, really strongly linked. So that's the first sort of set of concepts, that is, programming to attract the audiences that you want to develop and the audiences that you want to keep. The second key concept is that you need to program consistently over the longer term. So if you want to attract new audiences and develop their interest in particular types of programming, you need to give them time to get familiar with the particular art forms and genres that you want to program. So, I'm not saying just program what people tell you they want, because if you take that approach, you will only ever program what people know about and what they know they like. Whereas one of the great delights of being an arts audience member over a long period of time is that you discover new things that you didn't know you were going to like. And that's one of the things that audience members talk about their experiences. Yes, of course, familiar things, pieces of music. For people who are keen music audiences, they love hearing familiar pieces of music. It's why people love Shakespeare. Shakespeare's a classic and they love going back to see different productions of Shakespeare. But also, as I said before, frequent attenders over the longer term tend to get bored with the same thing. The number of theatre goers I heard say, subscribers, please don't give us any more David Williamson. We are sick of David Williamson. That's the kind of thing they will tell you in focus groups, So you need to think about, what people might like that they won't know about. You're not just serving up what they tell you they want. That's an important distinction, I guess. So developing people's interests in particular types of things over the longer term requires consistent programming. For example, Country Arts South Australia has been committed to getting people interested in contemporary dance. And one of the ways they've begun to grow audiences for contemporary dance is programming it year after year after year after year. Not just programming it, but programming it and building strategic, marketing, communications programs around it, offering opportunities to get involved in dance if you want to yourself, and opportunities to talk to the artists and ask the artists questions and engage at a deeper level. So all, programming the work on its own consistently over the long term is a prerequisite for developing audiences, but you also need to, do some thinking about strategic marketing and engagement and, piquing people's curiosity, providing opportunities for conversations with the artists is one of the great ways to do that. And over time, audiences will develop relationships with particular companies or particular performers and come to deeper understandings of their work. but that's why you need to repeat program, not the same work necessarily, but the same company or the same performer, so that they'll bring their new show, they'll bring a different part of their repertoire, but the audience gets a chance to form a real relationship with them and to understand their work. And I think that, I'm being completely art form and genre neutral here. I think that works as much with, I'm just going to pull something out of the air that, a band like the Teskey Brothers that some of you might know, that's become really popular lately, nationally and internationally. People get to know their music over time. They might not have liked their sort of blues soul style when they first heard it, but the more they engage and the more new work they hear, the more they, buy the albums, download the stuff, go to concerts, the more they discover they like it. And so their audience has really grown. So it can be, it works in the popular field as well as in more obscure fields like the contemporary dance example from Country Arts South Australia. So program consistently over the longer term, particularly for the kinds of things that you think people won't be so familiar with. And the third key concept is seek feedback and get to know your audiences. One of the key questions is to find out how often your audiences attend. Database analysis has shown that most people only attend a performing arts event once every 1 to 2 years in the sort of average, performing arts centres database. 80% of people will probably only come once every, on average, it was 18 months some years ago when I did the analysis of a national database. So if you think about how many times they attend over what period of time, how long will it take them to actually have been to something 3 times? You're talking more than 3 years. So that's why our time frame for programming really needs to be, 3 to 5 years at a minimum before you're starting to really develop audiences. Some people, of course, will come a lot more often than that. Some people, you probably know this, they will come to everything you offer. And, in regional Australia, I think what's happened with a lot of audiences is we've trained them to like a great variety of things because, if that's kind of the only performing arts experience in town, then they'll come to it almost no matter what it is, if they really, really love the performing arts. So I've certainly seen that in research I've done, that audiences in some regional centres have trained to have really, really broad tastes because, that's the only thing on in town, if you like, and so they come. So understanding, how people attend, what they think of the experiences they have with you, whether they recommend those experiences to friends and family. One of the other things that's really important to understand is what other arts and cultural events they go to. Do they travel into either a larger centre nearby or come into Melbourne? And if so, what do they see? How often do they do that? It's really important to understand where you sit in the totality of your audience's arts and cultural experiences. Some people, if you put on opera, for example, you brought in a little touring opera company, micro company, and offered the chance for people in your area to hear opera. Some people might have already been into Melbourne and seen opera, but they think, oh, that kind of small scale thing is I'm just not going to go to that, because when I go to opera, I want it to be the big experience with the big orchestra, blah. So people will have preferences, and it's important that you understand all of those as well. On the other hand, there might be people, I was doing a focus group in a regional Victorian town not so long ago, and asked a group of infrequent attenders what sorts of events they'd had attended and what sorts of events they might be curious about. And about half the focus group, so about 5 or 6 people, said they would be willing to try opera. The other half said they wouldn't go if we paid them. So, opera tends to be a genre that people divide quite strongly over. But you never know. I mean, I remember in Western Australia when I was doing some work in a fairly remote town in the wheat belt, if any of you know that part of Western Australia, they had discovered that wheat farmers came into the opera. They started a partnership with WA Opera to do a kind of opera hits program. And people came from all over, from quite a long way away. And the venue managers there just said to me, you know, who knew wheat farmers would love opera? They had no idea. So sometimes it can be surprising, and getting to know what your audience thinks, you know, what they've attended in the past, and, you know, what they thought of some of the more adventurous experiences they had, you know, what sorts of things they might be curious about. It can really help both your programming and also your marketing. So I think that's really the end of my 3 key concepts. So the first one being program to attract the audiences that you want to develop and that you want to keep. Program consistently over the longer term, and by that I mean a minimum of 3 to 5 years. And seek feedback from and get to know your audiences.
Thanks,
So I'm happy to take some questions now, Anna, or we could dive straight into the 2 little case studies either.
Sure. I think it would be great to go into the case studies first, if that's okay. The second person I was going to invite to speak today hasn't been able to join us. So I was wondering if, while I'm asking Lisa the first round of questions, if the other people attending today might like to have a think about how they would respond to those questions. And if they're interested, you're very welcome to volunteer after I ask Lisa these handful of questions. So thank you so much for agreeing to volunteer your organisation as a case study for us. I'll run through a few questions that Merryn and I discussed earlier, and as you answer, Lisa, Merryn might want to jump in and respond to different points, or might choose to just wait until the end once you've had a chance to answer all the questions. But I thought maybe just to begin with, if you could just give us a quick, maybe 1-sentence summary, if that's possible, of what your organisation does.
It's so not possible. It depends on which organisation I'm actually representing. I've been listening, Merryn, to your size of audience that you possibly are talking about, and my potential audience size is quite freaky, because our township has 350 people in it, and aside from that, our greater area has maximum 2,000 people, and our absolute potential audience size is very minimal. However, we have an enormous tourist population that comes in transitorily, and they're looking for an experience. My background's in marketing as well, so the reach into those people is essential for us in order to be able to program things that we actually can afford to show for ourselves. I'm very mindful this is being recorded, and that I possibly say something that other people in my organisation might not necessarily agree with. So
well, that's okay. Let's, how about we just start with, is it Mira that you're going
to hit me with the questions? Look, I think probably not. Mira is very new. So Mira is the Marysville Information and Regional Arts Space. We're extremely new kids on the block. We've been operating for a couple of years now, and the intention behind Mira is to create an art space that solves a number of artistic provides a solution for a number of artistic challenges that we have in the town. I'm not officially responsible for programming Mira, but I'm certainly quite influential in how we go about programming Mira. So I would prefer to talk in my tag role.
Yeah, sure. So
Triangle Arts Group, because we also program stuff that doesn't centre around Mira into town. And I also confess that I'm also a library officer, and we also program an enormous amount of cultural stuff through the library, probably more than anything else, but our library is in a town a bit further away. So hit me with the questions as tag.
Wearing lots of different hats as Triangle Arts.
That's
Okay.
how we all do it in the regional world.
Absolutely. All right. So the first question is, how does TAG choose the events that they program?
Wow. Yeah, they're huge. They often choose us, not so much how we choose them. Once upon a time, we had a fabulous situation going before bushfires here. So that's another overlay here from 10 years ago. Once upon a time, we had a situation where we had an organisation who programmed much of the town, and we had a database of committed audience who would come from quite a long distance. And I know it doesn't sound like much, but there were 80 people who held seasons passes, which for us is a massive database, and they used to come to everything. So once we had the fire situation, and then took several years to get ourselves sort of back started, a lot of the programming was directed towards bringing big things in, like the opera, like comedy, like where somebody would come from the outside and provide entertainment on a grand scale in order to attract a bit of attention, also for us to raise funds and to make the most of our huge influx of tourists that we have across the year. That has slowly sort of changed over the last 5 years maybe. So now we're into the space where we're having to program for ourselves, but also to be able to put the shows on the table for the greater audience that are very transitory. So we choose what we would like to see, but that would appeal to the people who are ultimately going to be paying for it.
Yeah. So as community members yourselves, you're kind of using your experience as being a community member to get a sense of what the wider community wants. Is that a good?
Yes and no, and what they'll come to, because once again, if you've got only this small percentage of people who are going to come anyway, and then if they're not going to come to, they're actually great. They'll come to pretty much anything if it's on. And I think one of the things that you were talking about, the wheat people coming in, who doesn't love an excuse to dress up? So we are often programming the experience as a holistic thing. So whether that be the opening of an exhibition, and we'll do it with flair, because the flair is what is going to bring the audience. So they're going to know that you're going to have a certain style of thing. And we do a lot for free. So we seek a lot of grants in order to cover the cost of having, because one of the big issues for us is risk. We can't have risk because we haven't got any safety net to be able to cover the risk.
Yeah, and you've answered a bit of this question already, but the next one was about who in your community do you program for? So some of that is the committee members themselves as a kind of way of distinguishing what other people within the community want, but are there particular audiences that you're trying to program for as well?
It goes in waves, and at the moment it is in our interests to be programming for a young audience, because we need some more we need more help programming into the future. We need to bring a future along with us, and it's a demographic that is very light here if you look at our demographic, but they are here, and the networks are good in terms of reaching young people. And when I say young people, I'm speaking of between 18 and 35, that kind of a range. But there's really risky programming, because the risk is that nobody turns up. And having said that, like our older audience will come to pretty much everything. We just had a program over the summer we called it Take It Outside. So it was a COVID response programming. The general idea was to reinvigorate the music scene, keep our local artists in paid employment, and provide because we're a tourist town, provide that kind of warm, welcoming, we're an awesome happening place facade. It's not even a facade, it's true, we are, for the people who are coming in to see that it's a great place to be, and maybe they might stay.
Yeah,
for a long, long time.
yeah, and you sort of, I mean, it sounds like a lot of different potential audiences that you're programming for. And the next question was going to be about how that's changed or developed. So you've talked about how
Yeah.
After the fires, it was kind of bigger scale events, and then more recently, it's a younger age demographic that you're trying to attract. So is there anything else you wanted to add about how your audience has changed or developed over the past 5 years?
Yes, because that particular program that we just did, we had a very specific idea to have the thing. It was always the same time, it was always at the same place, always had the same actions involved in it, and the audience were required to bring their own everything, which actually gave them a whole lot of ownership, which is quite an unexpected bonus, because by the end of the program, and we had programmed in varying genres of music. So it wasn't, you weren't going to come every week and get country music. You weren't going to come every week and get jazz and blues. You weren't going to come every week and get, you know, there was beautiful lyric singing. We didn't go into classics because we were outdoors and it's an issue with the instrumentation. But we did have an unexpected visit from the Australian Welsh Male Choir, and that had our biggest audience of the lot. Of all of the audience, and we had surprisingly large audiences from time to time, all very COVID safe, of course, and keeping their distance. And one of the big issues was keeping family groups within family groups, and the audience, they were extremely well behaved and did a very good job at it. But the big bonus was families came with children, and that not only made us as programming team go, yeah, wow, great, families with children, but the older people, it was the one thing that just kept coming back to us. Isn't it fabulous to see families? It's wonderful, builds our confidence, and then people were coming because they thought they'd see the families with the children, and that built the audience.
Yeah. So over the next 5, oh sorry, I'll let Merryn go ahead.
I was just going to ask Lisa whether you thought the outdoor venue actually probably encouraged families with children.
Yes, definitely. And also, like, part of the issue of our township is we don't have any big venues. We only have small venues. There's no church hall. There's no big airy space. We have maximum capacity in most cases of 50. We have one big basketball court, which is usually the go-to venue, but it's so expensive to make that actually sound properly. Like, you have to put a lot of effort into the audio in order to make that a good show. People were bringing their dogs to this particular event, and when they had to go inside into our big venue, because we had that Australia Day with the most hideous weather, I don't know if you remember, the dogs loved the show, and it was actually probably, once again, another what I would call a really big success for onward programming, because it demonstrated that we were able to be a little bit flexible about who could come.
Yeah, and that's a great segue as well into the final question I have for you, which was, how would you like to see your audience develop over the next 5 years?
Well, like everyone, I'd love to have, like, back to the days when we had 80 members, and every time we did anything, they'd be the first ones lining up for ticket sales, and they were bringing along grandparents, bringing along the grandchildren, and then mum and dad coming because it was so good. And a variety of performance. I mean, one of the problems we have, of course, is like anyone else in a regional area, is staging, and audio staging is so expensive to put that stuff together to make a good event, and nothing kills a show like bad sound. So where we would go, the sky's the limit. But in 5 years, so we're bringing it down to a reasonable time frame, I'd love to see the families back the way it used to be, where the kids would bring the cushions, put them down at the front, the kids would sit on the cushions at the front, parents at the back, and kids would be left to their own devices to enjoy the show without being corralled into a space that was deemed suitable, and that was a regular thing, and that people actually came to town in order to see that or have that experience, because it's actually for for us, it's about the experience, not just the show, but the whole town experience.
Beautiful.
So when you say people brought everything, does that mean they brought their food as well?
Yep.
Yeah. And have you ever
everything, and they cleaned up after themselves, which was absolutely the most. Yeah. Sorry.
Have you ever done BYO food in an indoor venue?
Yes, we have. In the same series, because we did have to go indoors sometimes, but one of the food is not the big issue. I think it's the drink, because once you get into indoor venues, there's an expectation that drinking is going with the show, and then you've got licensing and that sort of thing to deal with as well, and then you can't really ask people to bring their own. I would like to see, we used to do that back in the days. It used to be called the cafe concerts back before the fires. And you did bring everything. You brought your plate, you brought your BYO, and then I think there was a bar arrangement as well, because of course that's where the fundraising is. So yeah, I think it's definitely something to consider for future performances. And then waste management's your only big issue.
You described that people don't buy subscriptions to like a series anymore.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
And did that happen
overnight?
Fires? Did it all stop at once? Yes.
Yeah. It was a tragedy, because that sort of stuff takes so long to rebuild, as we've discovered, because it's an imperative now into the future, but we haven't been able to get back on that horse, and that's a big shame, because that's gold.
And of course,
it comes back to the risk, because we can't afford to program a long series and give the impression that we're going to be able to commit to a long series. So why would anyone commit to us if we're not going to commit to the series? But that's time fixes that.
Yes. And of course, with COVID, it's been impossible to program far ahead anyway.
Yeah, well, we've had to cancel a few, surprisingly few though, compared to what we thought we would have to cancel. And I think the bonus there is you've got the social media to get messages out very quickly, and can be a much more reactive.
Yeah. And so one of the key things of, building an audience and then encouraging people to buy, in advance, is having the database. And have you obviously you've lost your audience because of the fires. Have you been able to build back a database?
Yes. And not necessarily a programming database, an events-based database, but more of a holistic arts database, in which we've sort of divided people into types a little bit, in the nicest possible way, profiled them a little bit. But yes, there is a large database, but the challenge is then using it. It's one thing to have the database, but then to use it and keep it clean, because it's the usual all voluntary stuff, and the database management is a very specialized tool. And when I say database, I'm calling it something very grand. It's not an Excel spreadsheet like anyone else who has a bit of an amateur database, but it's a good one. Because
how do you sell tickets?
How do we build it? Well, see, this is the thing. We don't often do tickets per se. We often do free events. In the COVID space, we've had to have to manage that, because you have to have, if you're going to be doing an indoor thing or something that's a real event, you actually have to do ticket sales, and we do them across the counter at our Mirror, which is the information and regional art space. And there's the staff there every day, because it's also our visitor information centre, so it has an imperative to be open 7 days a week as part of its accreditation. So for us, that's a great marriage, because we can have ticket sales all the time, and that's particularly important for the big events in town. For example,
and have you found a way to offer?
Speaking out of school, but
sorry, I was just going to ask.
No,
found a way to buy online.
It looks like there might be a bit of a lag with Lisa's internet. Lisa, I'm not sure if you can hear us at the moment, but your screen is frozen. So I might just ask Adam if you could take.
The question was, have we found?
Sorry, Lisa, we
how are we going?
Losing you there with the internet connection. So I might.
Yes, my internet is unstable, apparently.
Ask if Merryn would like to respond any more to the particular things you talked about in relation to Triangle Arts Group. So wanting to build on those family audiences over the next few years, and how you might want to approach that, maybe through how you're using your database or other things that Merryn mentioned in those earlier introductory points. Merryn, did you want to respond to something?
Oh, yeah. So, Lisa, I was just wondering if you were able to think about offering online ticket sales in the future.
Yeah, I was just typing a response to you in case you didn't get back in. But yeah, I think it's really something we would do, but it's very hard to convince other people in your organisation or around that paying X amount of % for the service is actually worth it when you're a volunteer organisation. People are very nervous about it. It's an interesting concept for a lot of people. They don't like. And that's, I don't make all the decisions. It's a collaborative decision-making process. I think into the future, definitely there's more comfort now that we've had a year of everything being online. I think there'll be more comfort in that response, but yeah.
I'm just thinking about, accessibility for people who don't live within easy distance of the centre where they can buy tickets over the counter. It makes sense to offer tickets online just to open up accessibility.
Yes, I agree with you. And I think into the future that will be an option.
Yeah. And programming for families. I mean, have you, you said some people do seem to come to everything. What sort of content do you think has worked best for those family audiences?
I don't know. I don't know the answer. I know there are things I'd like to try because I know what would have appealed to me when I had the families, but I don't know who makes the decisions about family stuff these days and what would appeal to them to get them out. It's certainly something that bears a lot more scrutiny. We have a thriving daycare centre here, and I think in my mind that's the way in to reach that market. But I really don't know what the genres or what the appeal is. I was looking to try some dance just before COVID. We had a sort of an idea lined up, but yeah. If anybody else knows the answer to that question, I'd love to know it.
Yeah, I guess I have a question just for Merryn about that. What's a way that Lisa might be able to find out what those audiences want, what those family audiences are most likely going to come to?
Yeah, so one of the things, I mean, if you don't have a database, it's really difficult to do any kind of, simple SurveyMonkey questionnaire. You would also have to have somebody with that kind of expertise. But it's often useful just to ask questions on social media and try and stimulate some discussion and some feedback, on a Facebook page, or, you could ask people what they thought after an event and try and use the social media feedback. Just go back and look at the comments each time, and, it's very informal audience feedback, but it's better than none.
Well, we did one very charming audience feedback thing because we had the audience there for this Take It Outside, and they were all sitting on the ground eating their fish and chips. So I just circulated pieces of paper and pens and left them pretty much blank with just, what do you want to see? And the responses were really cute. And I also actually targeted children and encouraged parents to get the kids to write what they wanted to see or draw what they wanted to see, just in order to see if we could get something back from. They tended to just follow what the previous person had said, because, you know, that's kind of how it works in that kind of an environment. But just even having that made me feel good that there had been such a charming response. And I also put it out there on a couple of social platforms for people to write me a letter if they felt that they wanted to see this particular style coming out. I got one response to that, but it was a really good, valuable one, so I was pretty happy. But yeah, I think that there's plenty of ways to try it on, but whether they're actually robust is...
Oh yeah, look, I mean, I think performing arts is always, you know, when you've got the audiences there, it is a great way just to do some hard copy feedback. And rather than circulating one piece of paper with one pen or whatever, I mean, to avoid the copycat response, if you could do one piece of paper per person, you know, it would be a bit more to organise, but you might get some more broadly varied responses.
Yeah, I thought I might have it in my little bag here next to me, but I haven't. It was multiple pieces of paper, but they were still, it's like when you write on somebody's going away card, everyone reads the previous person's message to come up with their message.
We've got 20 minutes left of this session, so I thought it might be a good opportunity to see if any of the other participants joining us today, maybe Margaret or Tammy, might want to offer and volunteer themselves for being asked some of those questions. And if not, we can move into more of an informal Q&A. But thank you, Lisa, so much for sharing your experiences in Marysville, and Merryn for responding with that insight about how Lisa might approach building those families' audiences.
Thanks for the opportunity. That was really good. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Pleasure.
So I don't want to put you on the spot, Margaret or Tammy, but I did want to provide you both with an opportunity to, So Margaret, do you mind if we get Adam, our programming communications coordinator, to spotlight you, which means your video will just be a little bit bigger on the screen for everyone? We can probably chat.
That's fine. Yes.
Great, thank you. So Margaret, where are you joining us from?
I'm with the St Arnaud Arts Council. Last year, obviously, nothing much happened, but we're trying to get back on track again. I found Lisa interesting at Marysville. We usually have people pay. We've got a small following. We've got a small group, a very small group, but we're a happy little group. And it's interesting how Lisa's bringing in the families. We must start to target the families. We used to have talent on tap, and that was great in the local pub, and it was just walk-ups, and that was special. And we've also have a photography group within our Arts Council, and that's excellent. And they get the Melbourne photographers to come up, and that's been very good in the past. But we're going to try and get funding, and I love the way Lisa, all their shows are free. If we could do that, that would be wonderful. But we have got a few avenues that we can get into, and a number of grants that we can get. So thank you.
I might ask you a bit about some of those questions that I asked Lisa earlier about how does St Arnaud's Arts Council program events at the moment? How do you make decisions about what shows you're going to put on? We have local performers who, if we need them, they come and do a day or a session, like they do a show. We do go through RAV and look at their program. We don't run a lot of. We do also have silo art, so that's an offshoot from our Arts Council. So that's getting very big at the moment. A lot of travellers coming through.
we're just in a bit of a, we've just got to get going again after COVID.
Yeah, of course. And I think lots of people are in a very similar situation where it's kind of a very past tense question. Who were you programming for, and now what's the future? So who within the community were you programming those events for pre-COVID?
Probably the middle-aged and older people.
Yeah.
We had a good little following, but we did have interest. We had a Buckrabunyal bought arts group that came and did a live performance, and that was fantastic, and that got a lot of young farmers come in. It was in the drought, just to see live theatre, and it was amazing, the response that we got to that. That was just wonderful. So we try and latch on to them, but they're in recess at the moment, and they'll probably next year do another play. Yeah, and we have been, I would have been approached by the Welsh Male Choir to come and perform, so we must get that going. They came many years ago, so that's another thing. But probably our target audience we've been looking at is middle and older people.
And has that been pretty consistent over your time with the committee?
Yes.
Great.
Only when we did Talent on Tap, then we would have families come. So maybe we need to get back into Talent on Tap, and I think it's the excitement of not knowing what you're going to listen to. That was good fun.
Yeah. And so how would you like to see that audience develop over the next 5 or so years? From that, middle age to older demographics?
Well, as you, we have to get it out there on. We try and get feedback through Facebook, get people to say what they want, and like Lisa has said, I think that she covered just about everything. But yes, we need to follow that a little bit too. We need to do more of what Lisa's been doing. In a small community, we've probably got 2,000 people here.
Yeah,
and a lot of newcomers to the town. So we need to tap those people as well.
Right. So more of those family audiences, more of those people making tree changes or moving intrastate and joining that community.
Yes.
Merryn, would you like to respond to anything that Margaret shared about St Arnaud's and what their experiences have been there?
Yeah, I think, that's very common, Margaret, that, the arts programming in a town tends to attract the middle-aged and older people. So it was interesting to hear from Lisa that, when they took the events outside as a response to COVID, that, it helped attract families. Maybe, with the kids being outside, parents don't feel that it's the potential for them to be distracting or act up, is going to be so bad if it's an outside crowd, whatever the factors are there. And that, that can be something to try, is a different venue. If you've always been putting your events in the same place, and you want to try attracting a different audience, it can be a good idea to, try some different venues. And going outside will appeal to some people who maybe don't like or have perceptions of the venues, that put them off. But as I said, I think the programming is one of the key things. And so finding out what people do attend already, what they go to elsewhere, when they go out to an arts or cultural event, maybe, music, the sort of more popular genres of music might be a good thing to explore for families.
Oh, Margaret, you're on mute. I just popped you on mute before because there was a bit of background noise.
Sorry. That's very good. We have a new outside space in our local botanical gardens, an area which is just superb, would be superb for outdoor, and we've got magnificent halls in our town. So, yeah, I think going outside, as you say, would be something that we could look into.
Yeah, even if it's only, you know, a once a year outside event. If it depends, if it's more difficult to organise, of course. I know that when I was doing some work in Hamilton with Hamilton Performing Arts Centre, they had recently started an outdoor, in fact, in their Botanic Gardens theatre event, which attracted a totally different audience and audiences from much further away than would come into the Performing Arts Centre. So I think that's definitely something to try.
Yeah.
And think about, you know, the content obviously being more broadly appealing when you do that.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks, Margaret, for volunteering and jumping in on the spot and having some such great thought out responses to what your committee is doing. I'll just ask Adam to take you off spotlight so that I can open up to, thanks, Margaret, to more general questions for Merryn for the last 10 minutes of the session. We haven't heard from Tammy, who just added in the chat that they're joining us from Corangamite Shire and have had some rare performances for school holidays for younger children and families pre-COVID, and the occasional theatre performance, and have just completed their light and sound upgrade in the theatre. So they're looking to re-engage the space. But are struggling to know what performances are out there and are willing to travel regionally. So Tammy, would you like to unmute and provide any more detail around that? Or
I don't think Tammy's got a mic.
Oh, sorry. Oh yes, I see that.
No mic or camera.
But great.
So I was thinking that, you know, RAV is a good place to start for some ideas on what sorts of performances might be suitable for your community, because, you know, RAV has the particular small town and volunteer presenter audiences in mind, you know, as well as the professionally managed performing arts centres. So, you know, there's quite a range of different events that you're catering for. And I think, you know, that the conversation with staff at RAV, you know, is a good place to go. And then the other place I would recommend, if you can make contact with VAPAC, which is the Victorian Association of Performing Arts Centres. They run what they call Showcase Victoria every year. Now they've announced the date and I've enrolled to book. Is it the 19th of May, Anna?
19th of May.
At Darebin Arts Centre here in Melbourne. So that's just a one-day event this year. And that's usually a place that, you know, you meet up with a whole range of different performers and artists who are looking for work in regional Victoria. Yeah, Rosie says, thanks for the promotion. Yes, indeed, you do co-produce this event. So, you know, I would recommend if you can get someone into Showcase Victoria, lots of ideas, and it's a great networking opportunity. You can talk to other presenters about the kinds of things that they've been programming and the sorts of audiences that they've attracted. So, yeah, there's two ideas.
Awesome. Thanks, Merryn. So were there any other questions from anyone that's been joining us today that they wanted to ask more generally around developing a programming vision or programming for your communities? Feel free to unmute or use the raise hand function or type in the chat if you don't have a microphone. While people are thinking of questions, I've just seen that Lisa's popped in the chat that there's the Regional Presenters Facebook page, which is, thank you for the shout out again. We have a private Facebook group called the Victorian Community Presenter Network. And that is a private group that is specifically for community presenters across the state to ask these sorts of questions of us and each other. So in the information that you receive via email with the RSVP, there's a link in that email that'll take you to that Facebook group and you can join it and ask each other more of these sorts of questions. And also I can see that Rosie popped her hand up in the chat. She just reminded me to let you know that at Showcase Victoria on the 19th of May, we'll have a get together for any community presenters who are in attendance. So I'll send you more information about that. But Rosie, was there something else you wanted to add?
Just to add to this really great discussion, and thanks, Lisa, for sharing, and Margaret. It's been really interesting to hear from you. But just in general, there's a lot of also external community events that can really affect, we've noticed, to live performance and touring events. So just a general note that it's really great in your programming calendar to have those annual major events in there always. We've experienced a number of cancellations across the years just simply from that. You know, the school fete actually really is an important factor to program around. Just wanted to add that to the discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah, getting the calendar coordinated in the community is really important. When I've been talking to presenters about how they program, you know, they've said, you know, well, we're a small town and all you need is someone's 21st birthday and there's half your audience gone. So,
Yeah.
you know, you really need to stay in touch with, you know, the footy club, the everybody, the show, yeah.
Absolutely.
I've got a question for Merryn, and it's similar because if you go from here to Healesville, and that's not too far from us, it's 25 minutes, half an hour, something like that, you will find on any given day at their memo, if they've got a show on, 80% of the audience sometimes, actually it's probably a big call, but a large proportion of the audience have actually come over the mountain from us. So I also would keep an eye on what your nearby townships who have got a stronger pull on your programming, because they have a bigger community in order to be able to put on desirable shows at greater timeframes. That's another place that is worth looking for.
Yeah,
conflicting
and that
time frames.
Relates back into what Merryn was saying earlier about thinking about what your audience's overall arts experience is, if they're seeing certain things from you, or seeing things, you know, either in Melbourne or over the mountain, wherever it might be, keeping that in mind too. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I thought I might ask Merryn if she has one final top tip for community presenters in developing their programming vision.
I think, you know, developing relationships with the types of people in your community that you would like to see attending is really important. So, you know, talking to mothers and fathers of young families, you know, just chatting, you know, what have you seen lately? You know, have you been in to see this show or, you know, that band, or just trying to find out what it is that people are curious about, what they currently attend. And I think, you know, if you are trying to broaden your audience, then you need to start by, you know, broadening your community connections, and listening and looking for, you know, clues as to what people are interested in is really important. Understanding your audience is really one of the key things for programming successfully. I think, you know, feedback, you know, you can't do formal audience research, so do as much informal feedback like Lisa's, you know, casual notes on pieces of paper with pencils is better than nothing. How do we get Hamilton to do a regional tour? Oh my God. Yeah, well, that's quite a question. I think the cast's too big, isn't it, Lisa?
The tour cost would be pretty high.
Actually, there is something that I would be, you know, another discussion maybe for another day, but, you know, after COVID, when so many of us have been doing stuff online, I'm wondering if there's a role for supplementing live experiences with digital experiences, you know, so that you can use the digital experience as a way of introducing people to new genres or new art forms at maybe, you know, they don't even have to step out their front door to do it. Has anyone had any experience with, you know, digital stuff in their communities?
We've actually run a couple of earlier webinars on hybrid touring and the benefits of delivering online performances and different methods of doing it. So I really encourage anyone who's interested in learning more about those things to check out our couple of earlier webinars, which I'll send you a link for accessing if you haven't got it already via the follow-up to this session.
So I think mixing, digital, which provides a whole range of different benefits and is a different experience, but mixing digital in with live performance as part of your overall programming might be a good way to go for the future.
Yeah, and a really exciting new opportunity for everyone to explore. That concludes our time for today. We're at 1 o'clock. So I wanted to thank you very much, Merryn, for joining us today and sharing your insight and expertise. And thank you also to our Auslan interpreters, Sarah and Susan, as well. As I mentioned, we'll make this recording available soon and email you all a link for rewatching it. We're going to have a bit of a break from webinars over the next month and a half to make room for Showcase Victoria and also our EOI process for next year's Connecting Places program. So you'll have some new shows on offer that you can book if you like. And if you know any artists that are making this sort of work that you think would suit our touring program and your programming interests, please encourage them to submit an application to the program. Also, later this week, we'll be releasing a COVID safe plan template for community presenters. So that's a user-friendly document that has been tailored specifically for volunteer committees who present live performances. So when you receive that, let us know what you think. And as always, be in touch if there's anything you'd like support from us with. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.